our fight against COVID-19 has reached a major turning point. We will be making a decisive move towards living with COVID-19.
Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong announcing significant changes today as Singapore eases up on COVID-19 measures. Something to look forward to from next Tuesday, March 29th, masks will be optional when outdoors. Another major change, Singapore will open its borders to all vaccinated travellers without quarantine from April 1st. It's 5:30 p.m. here in Singapore. You're watching The Big Story with me, Hairianto Diman. Subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you will not miss a single episode. After more than 2 years of battling with the COVID-19, it's what we've been waiting for. Singapore moving decisively towards living with the virus, with a significant easing of measures from next Tuesday, March 29th. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong addressing the nation this morning, announcing the next steps.
We will make the following changes to our SMMs. First, we will double the group size from the current 5 persons to 10 persons. Second, we will allow up to 75% of employees who can work from home to return to their workplaces. Third, we will increase the capacity limit for larger events and settings, those with more than 1,000 people, to 75%. Fourth, wearing masks outdoors will now be optional. This is because the risk of outdoor transmission is significantly lower. But indoors, masks will still be mandatory. Finally, we will maintain safe distancing requirements for now. 1 meter between groups where masks are off, to minimize transmission in mask-off settings.
Following PM Lee's address, the COVID-19 task force provided more details on the further easing of measures. They include when mask wearing is required and when it's optional. According to the ministers, it all comes down to the setting. Some examples of indoor settings where mask wearing is required are within office buildings, shopping malls and lifts, within public transport such as buses and trains, and within hawker centres, coffee shops and wet markets. Some example of outdoor settings where mask wearing is optional are at HDB void decks and HDB retail shop walkways, at bus stops and open-air bridges, as well as in parks, fields and nature trails that are open and unenclosed spaces. More easing at F&B outlets as well. Groups of up to 10 vaccinated diners, the sale and consumption of alcohol after 10:30 p.m, live performances and broadcast programs, as well as recorded entertainment. Now, these will all be allowed again from March 29th. And Finance Minister Lawrence Wong says authorities are looking into safely resuming nightlife businesses like bars, pubs, karaoke establishments and nightclubs.
These are activities with higher risk of transmission, and it is also generally more difficult to comply with the prevailing SMM 1 to 5 in these settings. So the agencies are still looking into these resumption of activities in these areas, and they will provide an update on the reopening of the nightlife sector in the coming weeks.
And in Singapore's most significant move to reopen borders that does away with vaccinated travel lanes, from April 1st, all vaccinated travellers can enter quarantine-free with just a pre-departure COVID-19 test. This new vaccinated travel framework means that there will no longer be designated VTL flights into Singapore, as well as no more quotas on daily arrivals and no entry approvals needed for vaccinated travellers. There is a caveat though, those who have visited countries on the Health Ministry's restricted category will be denied entry. There are no countries or regions in that category yet.
This shift to the vaccinated travel framework is a decisive step for Singapore and an important signal to the world that Singapore has fully reopened its borders, that we are reconnecting with the world and reclaiming Changi's status as an international aviation hub.
Vaccinated people can drive freely between Singapore and Johor Bahru without the need for tests and quarantine when land travel for all modes of transport resume on April 1st. Public buses like Service 170 that have routes on the two sides will also restart. This is a highly anticipated move that is likely to return land movement to pre-pandemic levels when 415,000 people crossed the Causeway and Second Link every day. Elderly people aged 80 and above will be among groups of people eligible to receive a second booster dose. Those with a weakened immune system or have severe chronic disease will also be eligible. Health Minister Ong Ye Kung says that given the international data that vaccine protection wanes over time, it's recommended that these groups get another booster dose. Details on how they can receive their jab will be announced later. Although today's announcements mark a major milestone in our COVID-19 fight, PM Lee says the changes stop short of a complete opening up, with Singapore taking a more measured approach.
Some countries have taken a Freedom Day approach. They have declared the pandemic over, relaxed all restrictions at once. Now they are anxiously watching their infection and mortality numbers rising rapidly again. We are choosing to maintain our measured approach, which has served us well over the past 2 years. After this major step, we will wait a while to let the situation stabilize. If all goes well, we will ease up further. But we should also be psychologically prepared for more twists and turns ahead.
For an expert's perspective on today's announcements, I'm joined by Professor Teo Yik Ying, Dean of NUS's Hock School of Public Health. Professor, for the first time since the pandemic, there's a decisive change to mask-wearing rules by making that optional outdoors. Is this surprising, considering the authorities have constantly stressed the importance of masking up?
Thank you for having me back. No, it is not at all surprising because it all comes down to a risk assessment and really an analysis of the benefits versus the cost. And to be honest, this is the same for all the safe management measures we have until now. Many of these measures were introduced when Singapore was effectively aiming to eliminate COVID-19 within the country, or what we now call a zero COVID strategy. That's why we have the mask mandate, both indoors and outdoors. We were testing people aggressively, having all these border restrictions, testing before they board the plane and testing them when they arrive. But now we are clearly moving towards a living with COVID-19 strategy. Many of these measures are no longer relevant. Wearing a mask outdoors will certainly still help to reduce the chance of an incidental infection. But really, I think we know that even though the possibility of this happening is not zero, the real chance of this happening is very low. So we are much more likely to be infected in indoors, air-conditioned environments. And also remember, with today's change, it doesn't mean that you cannot wear a mask outdoors. If you're still uncomfortable and you feel more secure with a mask when you're outdoors, do continue to do so to protect yourself. And at this point, people have asked me, how can me as a public health spokesperson advocate easing of safety measures, including outdoor mask wearing, that will expose people to the chance of a COVID infection? So my answer has always been very clear. Public health is never just about infection control and management, but public health is also about weighing different policy decisions. What are the advantages, disadvantages? What are the chances of different scenarios happening? Just like how we evaluate whether a cancer drug that costs $500,000 a year should be administered to a single patient and whether that can be covered by the national subsidy. What is the opportunity cost? So equally, now we are talking about what are the opportunity costs to maintaining strict border control measures into Singapore, limiting activities in schools, concert halls, even mandating mask wearing outdoors, whether it continues to be necessary when we intend to live with COVID-19 for the long term.
Professor, more easing for restaurants and bars as well, like the lifting of the 10:30 p.m. alcohol ban. And Minister Lawrence Wong says authorities are looking into the safe resumption of nightlife businesses. Is Singapore in a good enough position for this sector to open up, and how can they safely do so?
So if we look at what typically happens in the nightlife industry, the activities are likely to involve alcohol, and almost certainly no patrons or service industry people will be keeping their mask on. So typically in nightclubs and bars, the majority of the activities are conducted in rooms that are air-conditioned, potentially crowded, especially when they're dancing together, and whether some of these halls or lounges may not actually be physically very large. It could be quite a small room. So taken together, the risk of COVID spreading within such settings is actually extremely high, and it's certainly one of the highest risk activities as we have seen from the beginning of the pandemic, not just in Singapore, but in outbreaks happening in South Korea, Thailand, Japan, and Hong Kong. So certainly, I expect Singapore to allow this sector to resume, especially with the Formula One coming up later in the year. But if you ask me this question, can the sector truly open up safely? Meaning to say, can all the regular nightlife activities resume without the risk of transmission for a highly contagious respiratory disease? And I have to be honest here, I don't think it can. Not with the nature of the business, or maybe perhaps I'm not creative enough to think how we can allow this. But what does this mean? Is that for Singapore to be ready to accept a certain degree of COVID infections happening at any point in time, when our healthcare workforce and hospitals are no longer at risk of being overwhelmed, because generally there's a degree of immunity in the population, whether acquired through vaccines or natural infection, that's when we are comfortable to allow the nightlife sector to open up again. And to be honest, I don't think that is actually too far away, because we've gone through the peak in infection numbers in the past 10 weeks. There is a level of population immunity now to allow us to take bolder decisions. We just need to allow the time for the healthcare workforce and hospitals to regain some breathing space, to resume a level of pre-COVID normalcy, and that's when we can allow the nightlife activities to resume.
Just to round up our discussion today, Professor, do the announcements kickstart our endemic phase? And if so, what would the next steps be in eventually reaching endemicity?
So I certainly see today as a first step into our endemic phase. And that's when I say we have begun. And it is a large step too. So there are definitely still many steps ahead. Like, for example, people are already talking about whether we still need vaccine differentiated measures, or for example, for travel, do we really still need the pre-departure test before we board the planes to return to Singapore? So on the vaccine differentiated measures, I actually believe these are still necessary at this point in time. And I've been saying in several occasions that 2022 is going to be the year of the pandemic for the unvaccinated. And I hope people can see why. We are lifting many measures we introduced since the beginning of the pandemic in 2020. We are allowing people to return to work, permitting large groups to come together for social and business activities now. So the risk of being infected with COVID for everyone, regardless of whether you're vaccinated or unvaccinated, right now is actually at the highest ever. So for those who are vaccinated and boosted, it's not that the vaccine prevents them from being infected, but rather the vaccines protect them from the worst harm, from severe disease requiring hospitalization and from deaths. But for those who are unvaccinated or only partially vaccinated, you can say they are still completely vulnerable, no different from the situation in January 2020. And they are at risk still of the worst harm that a COVID infection can produce. So in the short term, our healthcare system needs to recover, like what I talked about earlier on. And what does recover mean? It means to catch up on non-COVID related care, to make sure our cancer patients, our patients with diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, or other problems where their care was deferred because of COVID, these people now have a chance to return for their health checks and for their health treatment. So even when the pressure from COVID patients falls, I think it's important to highlight there is still this backlog of patients that require a lot of catch-up attention. And this is precisely why we still need vaccine differentiated measures. Because at this point in time, we really want to minimize the number of people who are going into the hospital, in part perhaps because they are unvaccinated, they are at much higher risk for severe disease. And because of this, trace together safe entry, in my opinion, unfortunately, will still be needed for a while, because these are existing tools that are used by everyone in the country now as a way to verify their vaccination status. I think we have to be clear. We don't think the contact tracing element is necessary as of now, but why should we retire existing systems only to have to introduce something else just to verify vaccination status? And my stand is very clear. We still need to differentiate by vaccination. But in the long term, if you ask me what are the steps ahead, I do see that we will remove vaccine differentiation, just that it is not happening now. So there are definitely many steps ahead for us to return to normalcy or what we envisage as living with COVID-19. So I have to emphasize, for the vast majority that are fully vaccinated, today's announcement certainly is already a very big step towards normalcy.
Professor Teo, thank you for your inputs. Professor Teo Yik Ying there from the Swee Hock School of Public Health at NUS. So what do you make of the changes announced today? Which ones are Singaporeans most looking forward to or not? Let's have a listen.
Yeah, for me, I think the change I'm most excited about is the 10 people group gathering one. Because I think for the past 2 years I've been trying to segregate my friends into smaller groups, and I think it's just a bit troublesome So it's finally nice, and I think with Hari Raya coming as well, I can finally meet my relatives in a bigger group Yeah.
Mask wearing, I think most people are used to it, so I think it's okay Yeah, even if it's outdoors, I think it makes more sense, but I don't think it's a big difference. I think most people will still wear the mask, especially if you have to go to the mall, you have to put on the mask anyway.
Yeah, I think the change I'm most excited about is the group size increasing to 10 people. So I can go with more of my friends at once. Yeah.
For me as well, I actually have a group of friends, but our group size is 7. So we've been putting off gatherings for a really long time, for about 2 years actually. So I haven't seen them since COVID started. But because of the new implementation, then I'll be really excited to make plans with them.
Actually, for me, it's the same group size as well, because I think in JC, a lot of us had cancelled school trips or excursions. So it's been really hard to find a chance to spend time as a large group. So I think because we had such big group sizes in secondary school, it's really great that we can hang out in groups of 10 now.
Same thing for me, because I also would like to eat with my friends again. For reunions or bigger groups of friends, we don't have to plan separate occasions. Instead, we can just go in one go.
Overseas, the search continues for the second black box from the China Eastern Airlines plane that crashed on Monday, with officials and emergency personnel having to work in extremely difficult conditions at the crash site. China correspondent Elizabeth Law, who is at Teng County in Guangxi, has more on the ongoing search.
So we're here at the crash site. It's basically, they've set up a small village-looking thing where search and rescue efforts are still going on. We've just heard from one of the commanders from the firefighting team that it has been very difficult. It has been raining for days. The ground here is extremely muddy. The terrain is very steep, and he said that there is a possibility of snakes and other things that could be within the forest as well, especially since some of the rescuers here aren't quite familiar. He says that because they pumped the water out of one of the indents yesterday, they were able to find black box, and they are continuing to look for the second black box today. But they believe that the continued rain throughout the week is going to hamper efforts. It is quite chaotic here. Everyone is rushing around quite a bit. You can hear quite a lot of shouting. Earlier on, when it was lunchtime, people have been bringing in food and other supplies on motorcycles, simply because the road through the village entering this place is just so narrow that even our vehicle that we were in, driving on a media convoy, was having trouble navigating the roads. So it is a very difficult effort, and especially as we edge towards the 72-hour mark, we will await to see what else happens and if there will be any more announcements.
As war drags on in Ukraine, US President Joe Biden will meet with key allies in Brussels and Warsaw this week. He's scheduled to attend an emergency meeting of NATO leaders in Brussels to discuss the response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And while there, he also plans to attend a meeting of G7 leaders and a European Council gathering. Mr. Biden is then scheduled to travel to Poland to meet with its president. Poland has found itself on the front lines of the military and refugee crisis. It's time for this week's Live Picks, and if you're up for a travel adventure, we've got just the program for you in Australia. But first, what to eat and drink when you are recovering from COVID-19. STFood online editor Hedy Khoo has been testing out recipes in the kitchen. Hedy, tell us about the first recipe. It's porridge?
Yes, it's a multi-grain porridge with pumpkin. It's simple, it's nutritious, it's comforting, and just a thing to perk your appetite and mood if you're not feeling like eating. So it's basically a very simple porridge. The base of it is to make your own chicken stock. Well, I prefer to make my own chicken stock, but if you are pressed for time, you can always get the store-bought ones, but look out for those with low sodium because a lot of these packet stocks come with a lot of salt and a high sodium content, so that's something that you want to avoid. I'm using multi-grain to add a lot of texture and some flavor to the porridge. And it's really easy to cook. You just need about an hour and your multi-grains are, ready to become a porridge or already turned into a porridge. And you add in your chicken breast meat and you put in some pumpkin that lends a lot of soothing sweetness. And if you like a more savory punch, you can add some dried white bait. Just 5 minutes to cook these extra ingredients and you're done. Just garnish with a little bit of spring onion and coriander and it's good to go.
Thank you for the sharing, STFood online editor Hedy Khoo. With travel restrictions easing, I am certainly looking forward to my next holiday. Travel editor Lee Siew Hua is here to share about her experience in Australia. Now, Siew Hua, tell us all about it, especially your ride up to Blue Mountains.
Yeah, that was super special, standing on the rooftop of a cable car in the middle of the Blue Mountains. So we are safety harnessed, we climb up to the top of onto the roof, and then there's an unblocked, pure 360-degree view of the Blue Mountains and the eucalyptus forest 270 meters below while mist swirls up. And then we have a drink, non-alcoholic, to celebrate the moment. And then the place, this awesomeness of it just conveys a whole picture of this new freedom to travel in 2022. Yeah, and with the VTL scrapped, such experiences are going to be more seamless than ever from Singapore to Australia. And I also really liked eating oysters at a table planted in the water near the coast, which is about 45 minutes, the central coast, which is about 45 minutes from Sydney. And there we are shucking oysters, sipping bubbly, and we're completely dry because we're wearing waders, which are like neoprene overalls. And it's, so Australia is always new. And I had, there's just no end of new restaurants, new experiences after 2 years of the pandemic, after 2 years of a stay-home blues for a lot of travelers.
Siew Hua, you've convinced me. It is going to be my next trip. Well, thank you so much, Siew Hua, travel editor Lee Siew Hua there. And if you're looking for something to listen to, how about the new album by Taiwanese band 831? Correspondent Benson Ang is here with me. Benson, tell us more about the music.
Well, I recently came across this new album by Taiwanese band 831, and I think it's one of the best Mandarin albums I've heard since the pandemic started. It's called Upside Down World, and it is full of earworms, which are so catchy that, you will want to listen to them again and again, because that's what I've been doing. Their new album showcases some of their best music so far. It's very worth the wait, and I give it 5 stars. And if we look at the album's title track, the song is actually about living in a topsy-turvy world, a so-called upside down world. Now, the music video is also very interesting because it's filmed in this desolate, almost apocalyptic setting where the sky looks orange and it's filled with smoke. So it's very atmospheric and very relevant. So overall, I think 831 is really growing from strength to strength, and their new album is really something great and something that we should check out if you have the time.
Thank you for your recommendations, and that was correspondent Benson Ang. We have more ideas for you online, including a heritage trail just launched last week in Sentosa. It's the first that is not on mainland Singapore, and there's plenty for you and the family to explore. You'll find it at str.sg/live. Visit straitstimes.com for more news and our YouTube channel for more videos. Subscribe by hitting the red button below. I'm Haryanto Diman. See you tomorrow for more stories on The Big Story.